Yeah, so there were two things that CISA published this month. Securing the software supply chain is the topic of both of them, and one is recommended practices for suppliers. The other is recommended practices guide for developers, which I think you can apply equally to closed and open source. They're not huge, 50 pages or so. All right, there's a reason that I'm reading, and they refer to a whole bunch of other documentation, right? They're less of a standalone guide and more of an index to all of the other things that you should go and read. But they're quite high level and their intentions are quite broad. They're not, although these are, I suppose you should say, originally designed as guidance for federal government institutions in the US, the guidance is just good general guidance. They refer to software bill of materials, of course, a number of times in both documents. But yeah, certainly the best practices for developers, you could apply that easily to open source projects.
I don't know why I feel this is important to say, but it's maybe obvious, but it's important to note that open source is a very, very diverse and widespread sort of thing. So you're going to definitely see some groups taking this very seriously. I expect the Apache Foundation probably will be at the forefront of this. There are several other ones who have a lot of developers and a lot of momentum and a lot of reputation and so forth. But then there's literally millions of open source projects on GitHub that have been abandoned, right? So it's but yet somebody is still using them.
And there's I think a sort of a fragment of the open source community that probably doesn't care what the U.S. government thinks, and might even sort of revel in ignoring that advice, right? So,
absolutely,
so yeah. Right. It's a super wide spectrum of people in that community.
Yeah.
It makes me want to do homework actually and talk with our PD teams here at F5, just find out where we are on these, in terms of consuming this guidance and making sure that we are. As soon as you said Apache Foundation, of course, I went, well, Nginx, right? Let's see how that's doing too.
A lot of our internal procedures and policies are, if not based on guidance like this, they closely mirror guidance like this. Mm-hmm. And yeah, for F5, it's important that we try and follow best practices. And these, they do outline good general best practices, right? Yeah, like we say, open source projects can be anything from, hundreds of developers on millions of lines of code to one guy who pumped out LeftPad to pull a name from nowhere, for example. Or some other small project that is in everything. I'm right back to that XKCD comment again about the whole internet being held up by the one thing that's maintained by the one guy.
Yeah.
Well, I was looking for a proof of concept exploit for vulnerability last month, and I ended up in some public GitHub repo. And I saw the latest comment that had been accompanied with a commit said, this code fixes a serious vulnerability. Hopefully my code is okay-ish. And I was like, I feel like this is like security in a nutshell right now. It's like gonna fix a serious vuln. Don't really know what I'm doing here. Just giving it my best shot. And I was like, there you go. That sort of sums up the whole thing. We have all these sort of $1 billion infrastructures and $1 million tools and all these things. And then we're all kind of shooting in the dark.
That's what's called a no-look jumper in basketball, I think. So you got to get extra eyes on that. I would think, it would take 2 seconds to just say, hey, if anyone else is reading this, please review.
You know what though? The problem is so massive that I can't help but just say, good for you, man. Like keep it up.
Totally. Yeah. I don't want to shoot this person down.
Yeah.
If everybody who had any capability to fix any security, at any level of security bug was doing that a lot more, we'd be in a lot better space, but we still probably wouldn't even be getting the kind of coverage that we really need to fix the problem. Right. Mm-hmm. So, it's like whoever that person was, thank you. I wish more
Yeah.
people did that. Like, and even if it's okay-ish, like, I mean, my patch would be okay-ish too. You know, so
And there we kind of come back to the question of the many hands, right? Is like if everybody writes okayish code and everybody collaborates on okayish code, it'll get better. And if everybody is like, oh, someone else is working on that, that's covered, then we're gonna end up with mediocre code and phones and this whole thing. So
it's actually, this is a slight correction. The many eyes shallow bugs thing that we were talking about is specifically stated as given enough eyeballs, all bugs are shallow. Was the original formulation of that. That's interesting because given enough eyeballs, it doesn't mean many. It means as many as we need, right?
Mhm.
And clearly we need a heck of a lot more than we have.
yeah.
So,
It's a lot of code.
right.
To give credit where credit's due, I feel like we've all sort of come to understand what the software supply chain is, kind of understand the risk behind that pretty quickly, right? Because and I know because I was in a talk in early 2020 talking about supply chain risk, and I brought up the term software supply chain, and a handful of people told me that they'd never even heard that term before. And this was like right before the pandemic started, and then within 18 months, now it's kind of on everybody's lips. There's a whole sort of a movement almost growing, right? So credit where credit's due. The security industry doesn't always kind of turn around and adapt as quickly as we have. So I don't often find a lot of cause for optimism in this field, but this is one. I think we're doing okay in this case.
Good. Good. Your optimism makes me feel better too, because you have the data.
Speaking of optimism for the future, I know that F5 Labs, you guys are going to be putting out predictions for 2023 sooner or later, probably before 2023, and
quite soon actually.
Software Bill of Materials is going to feature in that, so you can read more about that then, and where some of us pundits think that might end up next year.